I found out my parents had sold my childhood home from a woman walking her dog. Her name was Diane. She lived 2 houses down from the house I grew up in, the house with the blue shutters and the crooked mailbox my father never fixed and the oak tree in the backyard that I used to climb every summer until I was old enough to know better and kept climbing it anyway. I had stopped by the neighborhood that Saturday morning for no particular reason, the way you sometimes drive past a place that matters to you simply because the route was familiar and the afternoon was open. I parked across the street, the way I had done a dozen times before, just to look at it for a moment. There was a moving truck in the driveway. Diane recognized me before I recognized the strangeness of what I was seeing. She crossed the street with her small dog trotting beside her and said how nice it was to see me, and then, almost as an afterthought, asked how I felt about the new owners moving in. She said it warmly, the way you say something you assume the other person already knows. I did not know. I stood on that sidewalk in front of the house I had grown up in and learned, from a neighbor with a small dog, that my parents had sold it 3 months earlier. My name is Hannah Reeves. I am 31 years old. I work as a real estate consultant, which means I understand property law, contracts, and the particular silence that surrounds a transaction someone does not want discussed. I had spent my entire career helping other families navigate exactly the kind of situation I was now standing in the middle of, except this time the family was mine, and the silence had been built specifically to keep me out of it. This is the story of what I found out after that conversation with Diane, and what I did about it over the following year. I need to explain the house first, because nothing else in this story makes sense without it. My parents bought that house the year before I was born. My grandmother, my mother's mother, had helped them with the down payment, a fact that became important much later in ways none of us could have predicted at the time. I grew up in that house from birth until I left for college at 18. My bedroom was the small one at the end of the hall with the window that faced the oak tree. My brother Tyler had the larger room across the hall, the one with better light and more space, a detail that had never bothered me as a child because I did not yet understand that the size of a bedroom can sometimes be a quiet map of how a family ranks its children. Tyler is 3 years older than me. He has spent most of his adult life starting businesses that fail in slow, expensive, predictable ways. A landscaping company that collapsed after 2 seasons. An online retail venture that never turned a profit. A food truck that operated for 4 months before the engine gave out and Tyler discovered he had let the insurance lapse. Each failure cost money, and the money, every single time, came from our parents, who believed, with a kind of unshakable loyalty I both admired and quietly resented, that Tyler simply needed one more chance to find the thing he was meant to do. I never asked our parents for money. I built my career carefully, the way I do most things, methodically and without much fanfare. I bought my first investment property at 26. By 31 I owned 3 rental units and ran a small but successful consulting practice helping first-time buyers navigate the market. I was, in the language my family sometimes used without quite meaning to be unkind, the one who did not need help. I did not know, standing on that sidewalk in front of a moving truck, that being the one who did not need help had quietly cost me something I never agreed to give up. Diane told me, in the easy unguarded way neighbors tell you things, that my parents had sold the house to fund what she understood to be Tyler's newest venture, something involving a chain of small fitness studios. She said my mother had mentioned it to her in passing months earlier, something about needing capital quickly and the house being the fastest way to get it. She said it the way you mention any piece of neighborhood news, without any sense that she was handing me information that would reshape how I understood my entire family. I thanked her. I told her it was good to see her. I got back in my car and I sat there for a long time before I was able to drive away. I called my mother that evening. I did not lead with anger, even though anger was sitting somewhere underneath everything I said. I asked her, simply, if it was true. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said yes, in a tone that suggested she had been waiting for this conversation and was almost relieved it had finally arrived. She explained that Tyler had needed the money urgently. She explained that the house was the only asset large enough to provide it quickly. She explained that they had thought about telling me but worried I would be upset, and so they had decided it was easier to simply handle it and explain later, once everything had settled and the business was finally stable. I asked her why no one had thought to ask me first, since it was, after all, the house I had grown up in too. She said something then that I have turned over in my mind many times since. She said the house had always really been Tyler's in spirit, since he was the one who needed it more. I did not understand yet what she meant by that. I would understand within the month, when I opened an old box of my grandmother's papers and found a document that changed everything. My grandmother died when I was 24, 7 years before the conversation with Diane on that sidewalk. Her name was Eleanor and she was, without question, the steadiest presence in my entire childhood. She had a way of seeing people clearly, of noticing things the rest of the family seemed determined to overlook. She noticed, in a quiet way that she never made into a conflict, that I was the grandchild who did things carefully and Tyler was the grandchild who needed rescuing, and she had her own particular way of responding to that imbalance, one I would not fully understand until years after she was gone. After my conversation with my mother, I went home and sat with a feeling I could not immediately name. It was not simply anger, though anger was certainly present. It was something closer to disorientation, the sense that the foundation of a story I had always believed about my own family had quietly shifted beneath me without my permission. I remembered, almost as an afterthought, that I still had a box of my grandmother's belongings in my own storage unit. My mother had divided Eleanor's possessions among the family after the funeral, and I had taken a box of old photographs, letters, and paperwork that no one else had wanted, mostly out of sentimentality rather than any expectation that it contained anything significant. I drove to my storage unit that same night. I want to be honest about what I was looking for, because I think it matters. I was not searching for legal leverage. I did not yet understand that anything in that box could be legally significant. I was searching, I think, for some sense of my grandmother, some reminder of the one person in my family who had always seen me clearly, because I needed that comfort after the conversation I had just had with my mother. What I found instead was a folded document, yellowed slightly with age, tucked inside an envelope marked simply with my name in my grandmother's careful handwriting. It was a letter, and attached to the letter was a copy of a trust document I had never seen before. The letter explained, in my grandmother's own words, that when she had helped my parents with the down payment on the house 31 years earlier, she had structured the gift in a specific way, through a family trust rather than a simple cash gift. The trust specified that her contribution, which represented a significant portion of the original down payment, would remain attached to the property itself, and that upon any future sale of the house, a proportional share of the proceeds, along with the right of first refusal to purchase the property, would belong specifically to me. Not to Tyler. Not to my parents collectively. To me, by name, written into a legal document that had apparently been sitting in a filing cabinet somewhere for 31 years, quietly waiting for a moment my grandmother must have somehow anticipated, even if she could not have known its exact shape. The letter explained why. My grandmother wrote that she had watched, over the years, the particular pattern our family fell into, the way resources and attention moved toward Tyler almost automatically while I built things quietly on my own. She wrote that she did not say anything about it while she was alive because she did not want to create conflict in a family she loved, but that she had wanted to make sure that if the house was ever sold, I would not simply be left out of the decision the way I had so often been left out of so many smaller ones. She had protected me, legally, from exactly the situation I now found myself standing in the middle of. I sat on the floor of that storage unit for a long time, holding a letter from a woman who had been gone 7 years, who had somehow understood my family better than I had allowed myself to understand it while she was alive. I called my own lawyer the next morning, not Patricia this time but a colleague who specialized in trust and property law, a man named Robert I had worked with professionally for years. I explained the situation and sent him a copy of the documents. He confirmed within a week what I had already begun to suspect. The trust was valid. It had been properly executed and recorded, even if no one in my family had thought to mention its existence to me, possibly because no one besides my grandmother had fully understood what it meant, or possibly because my parents had simply hoped, when the time came, that I would never find out. The house had been sold for $420,000. Under the terms of the trust, I was entitled to roughly $140,000 of those proceeds, a share my parents had quietly kept entirely for themselves and for Tyler's fitness studio venture. But there was something more significant in that document than the money. The right of first refusal meant that if the new owners of the house ever decided to sell, I had a binding legal right to purchase it back before it could go to anyone else, at fair market value, regardless of what my parents wanted. Robert explained that this right was unusual, but completely enforceable. My grandmother, it seemed, had wanted to make sure that even if the house left the family once, there would always be a door back to it, held specifically for me. I did not confront my parents immediately. I did not call Tyler and demand to know what he understood about any of this. I sat with the information the way I sit with most important things, carefully, quietly, while I decided exactly what I wanted to do with the door my grandmother had left open for me. It took me 3 more months to find out that the new owners, a young couple who had bought the house with plans to renovate and eventually flip it, were already looking to sell again far sooner than they had originally planned. That was when I made the call that would bring me back to the house with the blue shutters and the crooked mailbox, this time as its legal owner. The new owners, a couple named James and Priya, had purchased the house planning to renovate it slowly over several years while living in it. What they had not planned for was James losing his job 4 months after closing, a sudden shift that turned their long-term renovation project into an urgent need to sell before their finances became unmanageable. I learned this through Robert, who reached out to their real estate agent on my behalf, careful to frame the inquiry as a straightforward interest from a qualified buyer rather than anything connected to the trust or my family history with the property. I did not want James and Priya caught in the middle of something that was not their fault. They had bought the house in good faith, with no knowledge that it had ever belonged to anyone with a legal claim beyond the sellers who had signed the original closing documents. I made them a fair offer, slightly above market value, structured to close quickly given their circumstances. I did not need to invoke the right of first refusal at all, not because the right was not real, but because a straightforward offer turned out to be enough. They accepted within a week, relieved, Robert told me, to have the matter resolved cleanly and quickly. 6 weeks later, I stood in the driveway of the house with the blue shutters, holding keys that were, for the first time in my life, legally and entirely mine. I had not told my parents any of this was happening. I had not told Tyler. I wanted the purchase fully complete, every signature finalized, before anyone in my family knew what I had done, because I understood by then exactly how my family operated when given advance warning of anything that threatened the careful arrangement they had built around protecting Tyler from consequences. I changed the locks the same week I closed. I want to explain why that detail matters so much to me, because I think on the surface it might sound like a small, almost petty gesture. It was not petty. It was the first time in 31 years that I had ever held the actual physical key to a door in that house, a door I had walked through thousands of times as a child without ever once being asked whether I wanted to. The visit. My parents found out the way most things eventually surface in families that prefer silence to honesty. A cousin mentioned it at a gathering, assuming, the way Diane once had, that everyone already knew. My mother called me within hours, her voice tight with a mixture of confusion and something that sounded almost like fear. I told her everything calmly. I told her about Diane and the moving truck. I told her about the storage unit and my grandmother's letter. I told her about the trust, the right of first refusal, and the closing that had happened quietly while she had no idea any of it was occurring. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said the house had always really been meant for the family as a whole, the same phrase she had used months earlier on the phone, and I told her, gently but firmly, that the family as a whole had not been consulted when the decision was made to sell it without telling me. I told her my grandmother had apparently understood something about our family that none of us had been willing to say out loud, and that she had quietly built a legal protection around it 31 years before any of this happened. My mother did not have a response for that. There was not really one available to her. The conversation that mattered most happened 2 months later, at Thanksgiving, the first major holiday since I had closed on the house. My parents and Tyler had, out of old habit, assumed they would be hosting the holiday gathering at their current apartment, the smaller place they had downsized into after selling the house. I told them I would be hosting instead, this year, at my house. I watched their faces when I said the word my. They arrived on Thanksgiving afternoon, the way families do, with dishes balanced carefully and the slightly nervous energy of people walking into a situation that has changed in ways they have not fully processed. I opened the front door, the door I had changed the locks on 6 months earlier, and I stood there for a moment before stepping aside to let them in. I want to be clear about what that moment was for me, because it was not about excluding my family or punishing them theatrically in front of relatives. Everyone came inside. We ate dinner at the same table where I had eaten dinner as a child, in the kitchen with the window that still faced the oak tree I used to climb. Tyler was quieter than usual. My mother kept glancing around the rooms with an expression I could not fully read, somewhere between grief and something like respect. After dinner, my father, who had said very little the entire evening, found me alone in the kitchen while I was clearing plates. He told me he was sorry, simply and without elaboration, the most direct apology I believe he has ever given me about anything. I told him I appreciated that, and I meant it, even though I understood it did not undo what had happened. I still own the house. Tyler's fitness studio chain failed 8 months after the sale, the same predictable pattern repeating itself one more time, though this time without my parents having anything left to give him. I do not regret buying it back. Not for the money, and not even entirely for the house itself, though I have come to love it again in a way that surprised me. I bought it back because my grandmother once understood that I deserved a door that belonged to me, even in a family that had spent years forgetting to ask what I wanted. I finally have one. If someone in your family has ever made a decision about your life without asking you, leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Subscribe for the next one. This is Hidden Blood Revenge, where the quiet ones finally tell their side.